This podcast is brought to you by sarahraven.com, which is home to everything you need for a truly beautiful and productive garden. You'll also find great and essential gardening kit and stylish, lovely things to have in your house to bring the outside indoors, all inspired by the garden and the house being tied together. There's also plenty of garden inspiration, how-to videos and specialist growing guides. So head over to sarahraven.com today to discover even more. Welcome to Grow Cook Eat Arrange, the podcast of me, Sarah Raven, and various different guests. And today I am joined in the first of a pair of episodes by Milli Proust, who has become a great friend of mine, basically because we share so much in common. But hello, Milli, it's so lovely to have you this morning on the podcast.
Hi, Sarah. It's so nice to be here. Last time I was on the podcast, I wasn't chatting with you, so this is our first podcast together.
Yeah, I know. That's so nice, isn't it? So what we're going to do... Well, I just want to explain about Milli a little bit first, actually. So Milli lives about an hour from me. So I'm in East Sussex. She's in West Sussex. And she's actually just recently moved to a new plot and a new house. But she has got a new book out, which is called How Does Your Garden Grow? And we're actually going to talk about that. And I'm going to kind of interview her about all of that, because I read it over the weekend and I lit the fire and I just sat and it's just the most kind of nostalgic, romantic, but also a deeply practical book. And I couldn't more warmly recommend it. I think it's really tip top. And it so reminds me of when we arrived here 32 years ago. And Milli's story is kind of amazingly similar, really. But today, we're actually going to talk about my new book, which I don't know why we're going first with mine. Sorry to be such an egomaniac, Milli. But she sweetly said that she would read the book before it came out on a PDF and then interview me about why I did it and sort of we would chat about that. So this is talking about both our books, these two episodes, but with lots and lots of other stuff in between. And as we move from kind of winter into spring, it's now that we all start to think about gardening. And so it's kind of, that's why, as Milli and I were just chatting about, gardening books tend to come out at this time of year. But yeah, that's the agenda. So, Milli, over to you.
Sarah, I absolutely loved reading A Year in Cut Flowers. It was just magic because it felt really different from, I think it's 14 other books, or this is your 14th, one of those.
Yeah.
And it feels much more personal than anything I think you've written before. And as a reader, I really loved hearing more about the layers of life and knowledge that have informed your work. And I wanted to ask, my first question is, was there a moment that you realized that this one was going to be something a bit more intimate and personal? Like, it feels like it's a life's work with flowers, not just a year with flowers.
Yes, yeah. I think because cut flowers were how I got into gardening and growing, without doubt. So from a really tiny age, I loved nature. I mean, as soon as I could walk, really, that's where I was happiest and what I was most obsessed with. A little bit butterflies, a little bit birds, but to be honest, mostly pretty flowers. And inspired by my dad, who I was very close to, and I was his little sort of sidekick when he retired early. I was born when he was 50, so he was quite an elderly dad. And he decided to retire and to do this rather wonderful thing. He was an academic at Cambridge. He taught at classics at King's College, Cambridge. And we lived just outside Cambridge. And I went to school there and was there till I was 16. But anyway, he decided to spend his sort of retirement working on this thing called the British National List of Plants. And what it is this huge, well, when I was a child, it's probably all online now, but it was this huge red, bright scarlet atlas, you know, almost kind of like half a metre across. I mean, tall and it was massive, like a great map. And each plant in the British flora had a map with a dot if it occurred in that 10 square mile area. So it was a map of England, and that plant would be marked. And so if it was something like chickweed, it would be entirely everywhere, except not up mountains, but, something really common like that. It would just be solid black. But obviously the rarities would just have sort of 2 dots in Wales or 3 dots in Scotland or whatever. And what my dad was good at is the sense of the topography, geology, geography, and he could look at the map and he would know that this moderate rarity would definitely be likely to occur in a particular part of the British Isles. So off we would go in his funny little mini clubman, and we would stay in pubs, and he would often just be driving along and he'd say, this looks good. And then we would get out of the car and off we would potter, and he would almost always find it at some point. But sometimes we'd spend a whole weekend looking, and sometimes, we wouldn't find it. But he was pretty good. And of course, as he found the rarity, he would also find tons of others. And because it was all done by amateurs, pretty much, this atlas, he was always adding tons and tons of dots of commoner things that people just hadn't recorded for that area. Anyway, sorry, slightly long story, but I guess that is how sort of nature and flowers got into my blood. And because it was difficult to find a specialism, because most of the sort of sexier, most good-looking, handsome plants had been already claimed, he claimed sedges and hawkweeds as his, which, not maybe quite my cup of tea, but he was the specialist, the UK specialist in those two rather blobby. I mean, the odd hawkweed is quite glamorous, but and the odd sedge, but not many. Anyway, so it was clear to me from the early days I liked rather showier things, and sort of snakes have fritillaries. You'd always take me off to Magdalen Meadows to look at those in April. And yes, so that was a rather long-winded answer, which is, it was definitely picking flowers initially from the wild, which of course is a controversial thing, which we won't go into here. Less controversial then than it is now. And then garden flowers. So he had a wonderful garden, a plant collector's garden that he allowed me to pick from. And so from, 5 or 6, it was one of my main joys, really. And then I moved away from it. He died when I was 17, and I sort of moved away from it and moved into science and studied to be a doctor, etc. But when I met my husband, Adam, he was a very nature freak. And we just discovered that we had this thing together, that we would feel happiest on a botany walk or a bird walk or whatever. And it's been the great tie between us. So first of all, my dad, and then Adam, I guess, is and I talk about all that a little bit in the book.
Yeah, and you write so beautifully about your father and your grandfather and Adam, and all those layers are woven in so beautifully. And what I really got from it was the way knowledge is passed down through attention, drawing, and observation. And I can hear from the book and in that bit there how your relationships with them have affected the way that you present your work. And it's really wonderful having such layers in this book, and it feels very different from the I've got them here, The Cutting Garden. Like, I love these books.
Oh, yes.
And Grow Your Cut Flowers.
Yeah.
You've taught millions of people how to grow cut flowers. And
I think millions might be a slight exaggeration, but I
don't know, Sarah. Personally, these 2 books were such a launch pad of a lot of my learning at the beginning, and continued to be things that I reference back at. And when you look at these books now, what do you recognize about the women who wrote them? And the second part to that question is, what feels most different about who you are today?
Yeah, really good question. I mean, funnily enough, I remember writing the introduction to The Cutting Garden 30 years ago when I'd just had Molly here, actually, I think. And Molly is about to be 30 in a month, my youngest daughter. And I remember writing this sentence: I hate hydrangeas. I love hydrangeas now. So having been brought up a lot on the west coast of Scotland, where every sort of seaside garden was jam-packed full of hydrangeas, and I don't know, there was just something a little bit grim and kind of coarse about them. But now I'm obsessed with hydrangeas. So it's funny how one's tastes change a bit, but basically still not in that the thing I love more than anything is not a big kind of showy offy massive vase of imported roses and kind of very regular flowers. What I've always loved and still love is something like you or Shane Connolly might do, which is just a single stem of a clematis where you celebrate the shape of the stem as well and the irregularities as well as the beautiful flowers. And that's what I've always loved, and that's what I still love. And there's good heritage there because Vita Sackville West books, Some Flowers and all that series that she did in the 30s and 40s, I think. I mean, that's exactly what she was into. She would have something on her desk and she would then form a kind of intimate relationship with that flower over that week until it died. And that's why she then got to love it and why she then wanted to grow it. And that is, for me, it's that really. It's the appreciation of the individual, almost like more a botanist than a garden designer is kind of how I would say. Anyway, am I answering your question? So how have I changed?
You've changed because you like hydrangeas now.
Yeah, that's true. I still like easy abundance too, though. But I mean, definitely, I like winter more and more and winter gardening more and more because of the rarity of things. And so when you get a beautiful hellebore or a beautiful winter flowering clematis, wow, you know how valuable that is. But I'm still the same person underneath, which is there is no doubt that I'm at my happiest definitely in the garden on a spring morning. I can do that every day, but my absolute highlight of contentment and happiness is in a wildflower situation, probably in the Mediterranean, where you just get this incredible abundance. So I go to Crete or Greece, somewhere in Greece every spring, particular week normally over Greek Orthodox Easter. I'm going to Skiros this year with some friends. And that for me is just like balm to the soul, whatever's happened. And I always try and do that at least once a year, if not more. So botany and then being out in the garden are still the two threads, I would say.
I wonder that I love that idea of easy abundance, and I see that in your vases. And I really learned so much of my initial skill set. I think I've told you this before, but learning how to put a bouquet together, I watched a YouTube video. I think it was literally the only thing that you could find on the internet over and over and over again. And you've always had these amazing, helpful, not rules, but guidelines, I guess, of how to think about categorizing ingredients so that you can go out and pick and create a fairly successful set of ingredients to work with and make a beautiful design from it quite simply. And that easy abundance is such a, I think, specific aesthetic that you have. And I wonder, it makes me think about how I know how I go out into the garden now and how I respond to the materials. And I wonder, I've seen you in the garden, in your beautiful garden of Birch Hill, which I adore. One of my happy places is that place. And I've seen you pick. And I wonder if you're motivated by things that appear and blossom, or are you still searching and trialing something that you've always done to look for new ingredients to spark your imagination in design work?
Yeah, I definitely have a restless mind. So I love the stalwarts, but there's no doubt that both Josie Lewis, who's the head gardener here, and I, we both have this thing of loving a proper scientific trial or semi-scientific trial. And so, I mean, we've actually got abelias on trial this year because it's, that's a real stalwart plant, Abelia grandiflora. It's a shrub on my south-facing doorstep. And Josie gave it to me 10 years ago, maybe 8 years ago. And I when she gave it to me, I was like, oh, thanks. It's a bit of a sort of, it could be described as a Sainsbury's car park. Sorry, Sainsbury's. You know what I mean. A supermarket car park plant because it's so low maintenance. But it's brilliant. So we're doing a trial of container ones and different colour ones and da-da-da. Anyway, I do love experimenting and looking for the ultimate new. And, you're obsessed quite rightly with sweet peas. And I long to come and have a look at your sweet pea patch in June because you'll be trialing lots of new ones.
Please do. Yeah, we're doing, I think, about 130 different varieties this year.
So you see, you're a stamp collector as well. And we are. And things like Cosmos, I still adore Cosmos. I really do. But climate change has not helped cosmos, and our very hot summers, weirdly, they just don't seem to love quite so much. And so we're actually finding new antirrhinums, for instance, the snapdragons, new hybrids of those, which don't get rust, are almost kind of becoming our number one favourite plants of the sort of half-hardy annual brigade. Anyway, so again, rather a roundabout sort of answer, but I love new and old, which is a bit of a cop-out, but I think you've got to have your stalwarts like Cerinthe major purpurescens, Salvia viridis blue, Euphorbia oblongata, Ami majus as your kind of stalwart foliages, and then your highlights come from, you know, either old or new. I mean, I love the brand new or relatively new sunflower called Procut Plum, which is this beautiful, muted, rather Milli actually palette. You know, so it's really fun to find new things. And that draws you out into the garden, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. And I think it's so interesting you saying those stalwarts, those conjure for me, those immediately, I can see how you use them. I can see how they look in your garden. They feel so Sarah Raven stalwarts, and they're so easy to grow and beautiful and abundant. And they also tend to come at times when there's not when it's just the beginning of the big season. But the abelias is interesting to me because I think it's useful to grow annuals and shrubs. So you have a constant, especially if you don't have a big space to grow in, then you always have something to cut, because if it was just annuals, it would look bare for a lot of the time. And having some interesting flowering shrubs is really useful, I think. But I love asking questions about time travel. It's one of my favorite subjects. So I've got a little tiny time travel question for you.
Great.
Working with annuals means living quite intensely with beginnings and endings, which is a little different from working with shrubs. But how has spending decades inside that cycle changed how you relate to time and life moving forward?
Again, it's a really interesting question. Well, there's one thing that immediately sprung to mind when you asked that, which is I definitely love annuals still. They're still my sort of core heart plants, but I didn't plant a shrub in this garden apart from things like rosemary and, you know, I mean, not a shrub, but a few roses. I mean, I just didn't plant them. I only planted annuals. And I remember Adam saying to me, do you know how to plant plants not in lines? And it's like, why? He said, well, could we possibly have some sort of hazy edge blocks, or should the whole garden over an acre and a half just be like allotment lines? And it was a good challenge. So the next year I planted all my annuals in hazy edge blocks, and it just didn't work nearly as well because you couldn't get in to pick them as effectively and everything. Anyway, so in terms of sort of time travel, definitely we now have at least half, if not even 2/3 of the garden permanent. So it's sort of down to shrubs and perennials and bulbs, whereas less and less is down to annuals. And that's just because they are lower maintenance, of course. And there's something very nice as you get older, having things that are kind of permanent. But what other time travel? I mean, am I answering your question, Millie, or not really?
I think so. No, I think so. I think it's like how you relate to time. And I think that it's interesting how you've changed the way the garden is for you, especially when you're so interested, and clearly your passion is cutting gardens and growing for ingredients.
I mean, I think the other way that I've definitely changed is that I used to only like spring because things hadn't gone wrong. It was sort of, it was full of optimism, and it was like new resolution and it's all going to be great. And somehow in August, everything's looking a bit, and we hadn't staked properly. And so I sort of slightly dreaded August onwards because the garden looked pretty rubbish. But we've got better at staking, and also I discovered dahlias, you know, quite soon after. And of course, I mean, honestly, genuinely, the garden's best possible time here is mid-August to mid-September, without doubt.
I agree. And over the last couple of years, because I come and help you with some of the flowers for the open days, the last couple of years, I feel like you've sent me an email saying you must find a date in August when the dahlias are out, which is always so generous of you. And it's extraordinary. It's like walking into a kaleidoscope of colour, Churchill, in August. And I think I definitely don't have the dahlia bug in the same way, but every year it does inspire me to grow more and have them more spread out so that there's colour everywhere you look. That's the thing that has always strike me about Perch Hill, is that your cutting garden and your garden has this incredible layered, and it's just all that layers of knowledge and layers of like hard won trialing and understanding that there's basically no gaps because you know exactly where to fill them. And so it's like a constant wave of colour, which is just for someone obsessed with cut flowers and growing for the vase, just so exciting every time I've come, no matter what time of year it is.
And the final thing that I just suddenly occurred to me is that in the book, A Year of Cut Flowers, I've got some very nice archival photos that Jonathan took when he first came here, which is amazingly now 30 years ago, of my very first cutting garden, which was down in what we call the westernmost garden, just because we never knew what to call it, because it's been a trial garden for 25 years. Anyway, rather nicely, Josie persuaded me to move it back to the cutting garden. So we're actually moving. We've just got so many dahlias to trial. We're claiming the whole of the what's now the annual cutting garden, which is by the hen run. And that's going to be down to trial dahlias. And so my original garden that I first ever made here 33 years ago is going back to annuals, and it will be our cutting garden. I'm a tiny bit worried about it because it's westernmost and we're quite open here and on the side of a hill. Its growing season is a little bit shorter because it is so exposed. But, you know, we've grown the hedges and I think it'll be okay. And that's useful anyway, isn't it? I mean, that's the thing, is I still love learning. And so we'll see how it does. The soil there was so bad, but we've done 30 years on it. So now it's really good.
And I think your actual, like your more permanent gardens always has annuals woven in. And I think there's something so interesting about the constantly learning and the constantly trialing. And your work sits at this fascinating intersection of science, trialing, and intuition. And how do you recognize when to trust data over trusting a feeling, or maybe you trust a feeling over data?
Beauty is first, number one. So we would have already done a pre-selection of what we're trialing in a sense. So hopefully we're only growing things that have been through quite an aesthetic filter already between Josie and I. And then in terms of the science, which is very amateur here, but, you know, we just do it on sheets of paper. When did the first flower emerge? When did we pick the last flower? So that's length of harvest. How many stems were we able? I mean, this is recut flowers. How many stems were we able to pick per week? So then you can multiply up. Did it get any pest and disease? Did it have a good vase life with a bit of conditioning? You know, that's so on the cut flower side, we'll have the same. And then obviously if it's perfumed, we put blindfolds on 5 of us, and I will put 10 stems under their nose and they have to give it a mark out of 10. And we always refer back to Machicana as our benchmark. So I put Machicana under their nose, 10 stems, and then a new one under their nose, 10 stems. And they have to have a blindfold because they can't be affected by the colour or the glamour of the flower.
We did a scent trial this year, and we found that some of them smelled like watermelon and some smelled like lime zest, and that they all have slightly different ways of presenting. Some smell like that indescribable sweet pea scent, but some have. There was a couple actually that smelled like a wet dog.
Oh, really? Oh. Well, I hope you're going to write about which ones that. I
will. Oh, I think it's also that sort of stuff really interests me. To go back more to the book, which I love and is filled with so much data that you've learned, and a lot of those sort of prized cut flowers that you've trialed and know are the best. If the book were to be placed in someone's hands at exactly the right moment in their life, what would you hope it would give them beyond a home filled with flowers?
A real reason to engage with your garden. I mean, I think that's the thing. When I started, everything was about low maintenance, and everybody's designs was, you know, topiary was a huge thing. Lawns were a huge thing. And it was all about having a view like another room in your house that was outside, but that didn't really need looking after. And that was the thing that I found very reductive and not life enhancing. And actually, literally physically sowing a packet of seed, which is, I know, a passion that you share, or taking a cutting, and then even better, going back 3 days later with, let's say, Cosmos and seeing that it's germinated, for me is literally one of the most joyful activities. And I adore pricking out almost more than any activity in the whole world.
Are you serious?
Yeah, I love it. Absolutely love it.
You want to come do mine?
Yeah, I really will. I will come for a Saturday and spend my whole day pricking out. I would love it. Rebecca might divorce me because she does our pricking out here. But no, I just find that thing I put on a podcast or put on the radio, and I go into the polytunnel. It's really warm and cozy and sheltered, even on a horrible day. And I just zone out of everything. I mean, your mind's ticking over, but all the sort of anxieties of your day-to-day life just recede. And what you're doing is you're giving life to this thing which is going to be better for your attention. And so there's nothing I hate more than sort of going in and there's these plants that are crying out to be pricked out, because I know that once you scupper the growth curve of an annual seedling by pricking out a week too late, it will really affect its end result and how productive it is. And so actually getting in really early is much better than getting in a bit late. And so it's literally like nurture of a family. And I just find that sort of endlessly optimistic intervention a genuinely massive life enhancer for me.
I love that. That makes me think of just that long-term attention that changes the gardener.
Yeah.
And it's a really powerful thing, I think, that we...
I mean, Josie would say I'm much better at that part than the planting out. She's really is like desperate to get everything out, which is right, of course. But it's interesting how we like different phases of that process and that whole... And I love that thing too of going out into the garden with a wheelbarrow of the things that you've grown from seed and then painting a picture with it. And so you can visualize, and the more you do it, the more you get to know the plants. You can visualize this picture in color, 3D, as you've got a barrow, and you plant it out into your 2 meters of soil or whatever. And I'm lucky enough now, I've done it long enough that I can literally see how that's going to look. And I find that utterly, utterly riveting and life enhancing too. So that's what I want to, with the book, is to get people to see that cut flowers doesn't need to be elitist. It doesn't need to be difficult. It doesn't need to be time consuming. Just keep it small. Without doubt, it's the thing that's enhanced my life almost as much as anything.
Amazing. Okay, I've got only a couple of questions left. I wanted to ask if there's anything that you feel particularly protective of passing on correctly, like if there's a principle or practice or a way of seeing that you feel strongly about getting the message across how you see it.
If in doubt, pinch out. It's just that, and don't overcrowd. It's really interesting because I find quite a lot of flower farmers,
me included, I'm a crowder,
pack a lot in, thinking that's going to mean more harvest, but it doesn't. And I promise that we've tried this. And so, if you put something in at 10 centimeters or 15 or 20 or 25 or 30 or 35 or 40 or 45, in the case of Amy, for instance, or a Cosmos, you will literally pick from that plant healthier for often twice as long. And so you're not having to do this changeover all the time. And so it becomes much lower maintenance. And so we honestly, when I started out, we trialed, our 20 sort of biggest grow, the ones we grew in biggest number. And we found that almost every one, we were doubling what a lot of the commercial seed suppliers were telling you to space them at. And so even something like Cerinthe, the honeywort, a lot of people will tell you to plant that at 15 centimeters. We do that at 40. And then we stake it, which sounds bizarre because it's a cascader. But if you grow it up through netting, and we use jute netting, it just means you get something that is sometimes 60 centimeters tall and then cascades down rather than just straggling along the ground. But it needs that space. And so generous spacing, I would say. And the second thing definitely is, if in doubt, pinch out. And that's the same thing, this is the sort of medical nerd, the sort of scientist in me, which is, again, we've done so much trialing of so many varieties here, where if we pinch them out at the 3-leaf stage, what happens is that the growth hormone in every bit of the plant, in every cell that's being synthesized, heads up to where you've pinched, which is a stump now. And so where does that go? It doesn't have anywhere to go. So it sinks down into the root, pushes out the root, and also pushes up into the axillary buds. So by pinching, you're stunting the thing. So you're not going to win the giant sunflower competition. But with, for instance, sunflowers, you multiply your harvest down that row by 5 to 6 times, and with an antirrhinum by 7 to 8 times. And just by pinching, you make the most incredibly efficient use of your space. So space wider, but also pinch out. And we do it twice. We do it at the 3-leaf stage, and then as we're planting out about a month later, probably. And that will mean that you probably only need 12 to 20 seedlings, even in a garden this size, whereas a lot of flower farmers will be, putting out more like twice that, and they don't live as long and they don't give as much.
It's so interesting. There's always so much to learn. That one plant that I think is really interesting for both those things is the annual Phlox Drummondii.
Yes, yeah.
Because I find actually that one is one of the ones that you can space really tightly and it does better. But pinching that and keep pinching and then net it, and you get those long stems that everyone's like, how do you do that? That's how you get them up in me. But the only other one that I think benefits from crowding is violas, if you want to grow them for cut. But it's so hard when you're a flower farmer. And what I find, and I think this might be where people are tripping up, where we've got to learn to be a bit more ruthless, is we can't bear to throw away little seedlings.
Of course. It's like infanticide. It's something really awful. Yeah, I know.
Like, I'll just squeeze another one.
Yeah, I know. Give them to your friends, is what I would say. Give them to your friends. Do a plant swap.
My final question. After all of these years growing, teaching, observing, learning and sharing, what still surprises you about growing flowers?
Oh, gosh. Well, new varieties, as we discussed, and yeah, I mean, I definitely, my foreign travels, I suppose, are the thing. So it used to be sort of wildflowers, now going to plant breeders and just seeing, I don't know, for instance, brown tulips, which were really fashionable in the 1910s, and they're coming back. So I suppose finding surprises like that is what inflates my hot air balloon into life, I suppose. So always discovery. Roses, again, I'm not sure if I'm answering your question properly, really, Millie, but Josie's got me into roses, and definitely that's something I want to investigate more and more and more and trial more and more and more. Yeah, surprises. I love finding a new scented plant. I suppose the older I get, the more perfume is important to me. And then meeting people like you, Millie. So those are the nice surprises. And that's fun. I love meeting people who are, you're not starting out, you've been gardening for 15 years or at least, but
I still feel like I'm right at the beginning though.
Yeah, but don't you find, I love that. It's not a surprise, but when I'm teaching, it tends to be people of kind of my sort of age, later middle age, but I love it when there is some young folk through the audience and you can see that they're feeling a little bit worried and anxious that they're about to dive into an entirely new knowledge bank, that they don't have anything. But then by the end of the day, you can see that they're going to find out. They're set, they're inspired to find out because it's unlocked an area of life that they just didn't know was even there in a way. I mean, they might have been bought by their mother-in-law or their mum or their aunt or their godmother. And that happens quite a lot here. And you can see them slightly shuffling at the beginning, thinking this isn't for me. And it doesn't always work. But I love the element of seeing a spark and knowing that probably, not with all of them, but with some, they've got a life enhancer for life. They'll still be doing it when they're 80 because gardening is just brilliant. It's just brilliant. It's physical, it's creative, it's social because you can go and visit other people's gardens. It's intellectual because you can understand the science. It's not musical, but it's got everything, I think, almost everything.
It gave me tingles, that answer, Sarah. I love that. It's like, what a legacy to be passing on to so many people. And I really feel like this book, A Year in Cut Flowers, feels like something to live with and return to. So I'm really excited to have it in my life now. And I think lots of people will recognise parts of their own lives in it. And there's so much amazing storytelling and so much information and really practical, amazing stuff. And it's really generous and thoughtful and grounding, which I always think that's like you. So thank you so much for sharing. And I'm excited to get my hard copy.
Yes, it's coming in the post. Oh, Milli, thanks so much. And I can't wait to talk about your book. So I will see you all. You will see both of us very soon. Thank you, Milli.
Thanks so much.
Thanks so much for listening to Grow Cook Eat Arrange. And it was lovely for me chatting to Milli. So I hope you get a feel of my new book, which is out right now and really, well, for me, very exciting. Next week, I'm joined by Josie Lewis, our head gardener, and we're going to talk about something that I think we might have talked about way back in the past, about hellebores, but particularly concentrating on a few new varieties that we've been absolutely bowled over by this winter. Having had proper snow and -7s here, they are the stellar plants that are just gleaming like moons in the garden, and we just want to chat about them, what to do with them, how to make them last well in a pot, and of course how to make them last in a vase. So see you next week.
You can find more information, photos and advice sheets on all the plants and recipes we talk about on this podcast by heading to the show notes or at sarahraven.com/podcast.